Hello, Manabil here, and welcome back to my series on ontology and metaphysics. And this time I will try to deal with duality or dualism, which is kind of, you could say, in some way, if I were to add an ism to my ontology slash metaphysics, the closest thing would be dualism, but it comes with a few caveats, right? But before I do that, or attempt to do that, I actually struggle most with presenting dualism, actually. And it's because of some particular aspects of dualism, right? But, we'll get to it. But before that, I want to add a few comments to my presentations in the last one about idealism. And it's sort of, I want to clarify the major problems I have. And there might be a few more than this, but at least these, right? And these are idealism in general, but maybe in particular analytic idealism. Okay, the first problem, and I'm sort of reiterating and add maybe a few more words and maybe something that I didn't mention in the last one, just to make sure that I get everything covered, right? Because I find this to be a very, very important aspect of philosophy among all the other important aspects. But the first step is important in order to get in the right direction, right? If you step in the wrong direction, you're probably never going to end up where you should, right? And that's also a problem in philosophy, because philosophy is a puzzle game in a sense, without any given solution. You can't find a manual that says this is how you should get here, you should get there, and so on, right? There might be some ideas of what kind of pieces you have and what pieces you don't have and how you approach that, and an idea of what exercises or algorithms or terms you want to put on it, right? In order to get somewhere in philosophy. But there are no manuals. There are no given solution. Nothing is settled, right? And I guess it will never be settled. What the closest thing to a settlement would be some kind of agreement among people who are philosophizing, right? So, the best I can do is point out what I find to be problems in other people's philosophy. And that is the main reason why I'm doing deconstructions. There are other reasons, but that is possibly the main, or one of the top 2, 3 reasons why I do a lot of deconstructions. It is to point out potential flaws in philosophy, right? It's not basically, there is a problem in people thinking, I found a flaw over there, so the whole philosophy has to be scrapped. So you have to go back and take my philosophy, right? You shouldn't. It's like if you are reviewing a car, just because it's missing a wheel doesn't mean that you have to get rid of the idea of cars, right? So it's a checkpoint for potential shortcomings here, there, and everywhere in a particular philosophy. And that's why I'm pointing out these sort of problems. And the first thing I think is possibly I'm trying to order them in the order of how you would arrive at them if you try to do a rigid and structured kind of philosophy or ontology slash metaphysics, right? Okay. The first one, idealism does not argue for an external world. It might sound like it, but please, if you have seen anybody making a very coherent and very, bulletproof quote argument for an external world, and at the same time saying, yes, this is an idealist approach to, right? An argument for how they get to an external world. Why are they talking about an external world? Where do they get it from, right? I'm not saying you can't at some point end up working from the idea of an external world, but you have to give me the argument for how you get there, right? And I think it's a remnant. It's a remnant of materialism. It's a fallacy that is still there, right? Based on prior materialist thinking. There's sort of there's a leftover thinking space in the mind, so to say, of somebody who has turned to idealism, sort of by rejecting particular problems in materialism. But there's still remnants of that kind of thinking. And one of the remnants is this appeal to a given external world. Or at least that's what it sounds like to me, right? And I've been listening a lot to idealists in the last 3-4 years, right? And I've never come across anybody who's even remotely close to making a coherent argument for an external world. My point would be you can't argue for an external world, right? But they pretend as if they're not saying, yes, this argument, this statement here is the perfect argument for why there is an external world. No, it's all covered up in terms and abstractions and all sorts of shit. And then sort of at some point they say, and this external world is made up of whatever, right? And it's like this conjuring or sort of you're a magician with words, right? It is sophist in nature, right? But I don't think that because they are still in that mentality of it's given, it's like they don't have to argue for it because it's given, right? But that's exactly the fallacy of materialism. So it's sort of it's kind of weird, right? As I've said before, if anybody out there should be so hung up on a freaking good argument for an external world, it's exactly idealists, right? I have a big problem with that. Okay, the second one problem is they take in order to explain this external world, right? They take this synthetic label mind, and I've been doing some thinking about how to classify abstractions, which is the category C you see in my presentation here, right? Further, categorization of abstractions. A synthetic label is some term that is not cognized and not experienced, but is a construct to classify and categorize things, right? Like saying, this is France, for instance, right? France doesn't have a color, right? France is not a concept because there is no color that is France or any sound or anything like that. It's simply something that is made up and put on a piece of paper like an atlas or a map, and then say France, right? And then it says, if you go and look at this building or these people and they make these noises, they are supposed to be understood as that label I call France, right? But that doesn't mean you can experience France. And certainly not that which you call France is not made of France, right? That's the switch, a category error, a humongous category error, right? Where they say they take the synthetic label mind and then switch it into being also, or maybe only, a substance. They say everything is made of mind. Bernardo Kastrup has said this repeatedly about his so-called analytic idealism, right? But mind is basically a catch-all term for all phenomena, right? When I say it's in my mind, I am actually really referring to either a color, a sound, a taste, a touch, or a cognition like Eiffel Tower and so on and so on, or an abstraction like imagination or ethics or metaphysics, ontology, and whatever, an emotion, right? And it's in my mind. It's like a spatial encompassing term. That doesn't mean just because you have come up with the term mind, that you can all of a sudden start to say it's all made of mind, right? Just like you can't say that France is made of France, right? Or that elephant is made of animal, or car is made of car, right? It doesn't work that way. It's a violation of the use of terms. It's a huge, huge problem, right? Okay. Then the third one is they argue for an external world as mind purely out of necessity, right? I don't see a reason for why it should be mind. I'm not saying you can't go with the idea that it's mind, but I don't see the argument. What I'm hearing is, if I say, what if it is mind? Then I'm not bringing in dualism, right? As I have written in my notes here, only possibility in order to avoid dualism, right? It's like, oh, what if it's also mind? Then I am avoiding the problem, so-called problem of dualism, right? The combination problem, or whatever it's called, right? So well, then it must be mind then, because that is the easy solution, right? And it is also more parsimonious because there's only one thing rather than two things. And according to my own standards of parsimony, if it's one thing, it must be better than two things. So therefore, it's the right answer. It doesn't follow, in my opinion. Parsimonious is not an absolute standard. It's a relative standard, right? You could say Occam's razor is when there are two competing theories, the simplest one is probably the right one. It doesn't say it is the right one necessarily, right? Parsimonious is when you have a theory, if it's very convoluted and very strange and very weird and, 17 different variables and whatever, right? There might be some problem with a lack of simplicity, or it seems more complicated maybe than it might necessarily have to be, right? But that doesn't mean that everything is best or correct if there's only one thing, right? It could possibly be too simple. It's just a bad argument. And I actually don't see any, when I really scrutinize what is being told or being stated, I don't see an argument for why it should be mind out there in that, by the way, in that world they haven't established, right? I established it merely by saying it's there. And, if that part falls in the argument, I don't really need to, find out an answer to that problem here, right? Because it is based on another problem that isn't argued either earlier, as I pointed out. But, just to add to the amount of problems in it, right? The only thing basically I'm hearing is, it's the only thing I can safely go with and avoid a lot of complicated explanations. But avoiding complicated explanations is not an argument for why it's correct, right? Okay. The fourth one is they use science to argue for dissociation. They say everything is mind. Okay, if everything is mind, why is it not solipsism then? Right? It almost sounds like you're back at solipsism. So why is it all if they say there's something outside my mind, but it's also mind, aren't you just categorizing your own mind then into an inside-outside part of your own mind? Where is the strong distinction between solipsism and mind is everything, right? They have to come up with an argument, so they create this idea of dissociation. Now, they use science to that, but you can't do that, because all of this thinking that is being done, doing idealism and ontology, metaphysics, whatever you want to call it, are all foundations you have to settle on before you start to do science. Any decent philosopher should tell you that, in my opinion, right? But then he said, oh no, I have to bring in science in order to clarify that philosophy. I need to clarify before I do science. It's fucking circular, right? As I've written in my notes, science is a description of the behavior of the dashboard. to refer to the subjective experience that analytic idealism calls a dashboard, and therefore can never be used to describe anything beyond, right? Science is something that describes your inner experience. Then how can you possibly go and say that science is going to help you describe the borderline between that which it describes and that which is beyond that which it describes, right? If you need a borderline, you need to have both sides of that thing you're creating a border between. You can't say, I'm only sitting on one side and not really experiencing a border, but then say, I'm going to use what is inside me to describe that there is a border. I need to have an idea of what is on the other side in order to say, there is a border here, right? It's between France and the Atlantic Ocean. Well, it's water out there, and it's land out there without water, right? That's the difference. That's why I draw this borderline, right? But if I only see land, how do I know there is a border if I don't know if there is something outside? It's like you can't do that, right? And it's also circular. As I said, that you can't use science to establish that philosophy you need to establish before you do science, right? It's stupid. Okay. The fifth one is maybe a little difficult to explain, but let me try. I should read it aloud of my notes here, right? Idealism concerning noumena. And idealism in that sense is an ontology of the noumena, or that which is beyond your own experience, the external world, right? Cannot change anything about the phenomena, right? Since the starting point for thinking of noumena was taking the original phenomena seriously, obviously, right? So if the metaphysics changes the understanding of the phenomena, the starting point for your thinking is then violated or invalidated, right? It becomes circular. So phenomena cannot possibly be changed by any idea of noumena. So why would I bother then, right? Idealism and any other kind of metaphysics is dysfunctional. Stick to ontology. It should be quite simple. Maybe it's just me who's having trouble, trying to describe it. But how do you start to talk about an external world? It must be because you have an internal world, right? So if you have an internal world, you're taking that seriously as something you can step further from into a fabulation about an external world, right? Now, if you get to some kind of metaphysics, idealism, whatever, and then come back to say, okay, that idealism, whatever, metaphysics is responsible for my phenomena. If that metaphysics somehow changes your understanding of your phenomena, you have ventured into a circle where you are saying, I have a starting point I'm taking seriously, I'm going into metaphysics, that changes my idea of that phenomena. You can't do that because you just used your phenomena to go and establish that metaphysics. And coming back to phenomena, saying, now I have a different understanding of my phenomena. Well, then you're violating the whole, right? It's standing in your bucket and trying to lift yourself up. You can't do that, right? So you can't change your phenomena based on your phenomena, right? That's why phenomena is what they are. You can't explain them. You can't take this back door behind phenomena and say, okay, this is why phenomena are like they are, and therefore I change my idea of how to understand the phenomena. But then you have to change that foundation you used in order to get to the metaphysics. That changed your phenomena, and it's like this. It's stupid, right? So you can't change your phenomena. You can't create a metaphysics that can change your understanding of your phenomena. Then why the fuck would I bother, right? It's dysfunctional. It's stupid, right? Okay, my last comment is why they use, in particular, Bernard Castrop uses the term consciousness and metaconsciousness for, if you're saying the experience and the consciousness, right? Experience and insperience, as I call it in my presentation here, right? He calls it consciousness and metaconsciousness. And I suppose using those particular constructions of terms is to avoid an appeal to dualism by calling the awareness of phenomena something different. If I called it consciousness and, blue whales, right? I can come up with some technical term, right? But, let's say awareness, right? If I say consciousness and awareness, it sounds dual, right? It sounds like there are two different kinds. There's consciousness kind and there's awareness kind. But if I call it consciousness and metaconsciousness, it's still within the same ballpark. It's still consciousness being thrown around, right? So this kind of screwing around with the terms, I don't like that, right? And it's all to avoid the idea that there might be more than one kind, right? So it's just a comment, right? It's just supposition, right? It's not an argument. It's just my sort of concern, right? Okay, so let me take a stab at dualism. And dualism is foundationally that you accept or you think there is an external world, you work from the idea, and whatever it is made up of is different than what is your phenomena. In other words, your noumena is foundationally different from your phenomena, right? It's different substance. If you say that phenomena is a kind of substance, then whatever is beyond my experience is a different substance, right? They are not of the same kind. To say that they're vastly different, okay, a matter of degree maybe, right? But they are not of the same kind. And it's how should I put it? It's generally been considered a bad kind of metaphysics / ontology, because how do you end up usually probably with a hard problem of consciousness when you start to say, okay, and the hard problem of consciousness is actually a problem within materialism. If you're not a materialist, but you go into some dualism that is different from materialism, because that suffers from the mirroring idea of your experiences being the actual outside, right? So then you say, but the actual outside is also, the imagination or abstraction called matter. Therefore, it's made of matter, and then you go into that weird abstract reduction, right? As I pointed out in what was the in an earlier part, right? But who says the other thing should be matter? In that is based on the materialist fallacy or paradox, right? What if I just say, I have my experiences, right? Why? What reason would I have create what I just mentioned about the problems in idealism? Why would I think it would be of the same thing as my experience? That's just about the only thing I would say it isn't. If I had to bet my money on something, right, I would say it's something different. Whatever it is different. But my point is, I'm not going to tell you what it is then. It's this sort of materialist, scientific, what-if approach. I can never get to it, so I'm fucking leaving it alone. But that doesn't mean I can say there is something beyond, right? I'm working from the idea that something beyond, as I pointed out in my ontology, right? That my cognitions, I treat them as some kind of representation of something beyond my experience. That gives me to me personally, a grounded understanding of why they are cognitions. But that doesn't mean that I can start to tell you what an Eiffel Tower really is or what a tractor really is, right? I only still have my tractor, but I'm treating them as a representation of something beyond my experiences that I can't get to. and that I consider to be different. That's the best bet, I would say. That would also explain why I'm dissociated from it, because it's so vastly different, or potentially vastly different. It's dissociated. How it becomes my experience at some point, I can't tell you. I can't get to it, right? But I'm choosing to treat it as such, right? We are at the level of philosophy where I am at the short end of the ability to argue. Here I have to axiomize. I have to settle on how I approach things, right? I can't argue for anything. And attempting to go beyond my experience, as I just pointed out in all the problems of idealism, is completely ridiculous, right? And another problem or an effect of all this idealism is you might end up thinking that whenever it gets to the experience of tomato, which I can't basically change anyway, right? Or pizzas or whatever, tractor and going to work and driving my car, whatever. It's just boring everyday bullshit, right? Boring, whatever. And I don't want to focus on that. I set that aside as less important than my great ideas about what is beyond my experiences, right? So you get lost in cloud castles rather than trying to get a grasp on your phenomena and how you approach them and how you potentially end up with some kind of moral principle. Doing some ontology, doing some, epistemology, objectivity, and ethics in order to go to a moral principle, right? You have to get somewhere. You can't sit there thinking about ripples the rest of your days, right? I mean, you have to. It's like sitting and read. You buy a car and then you read your manual for the rest of your life and never get to drive your fucking car, right? It's stupid. So, to the best of my argumentation here, it's completely ridiculous to start to fabulate about what might be beyond your experiences, right? Get a grasp on how you approach your phenomena, right? That's the deal. Stick to ontology. Okay. Please share, like, and subscribe. And beyond that, have a nice day. See you in the next one.